Welcome to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend-Gard, your host, and I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School and a faculty fellow at the A.B. Friedman School of Business at Tulane. And I just want to quilt. So Quilter Lyric Kinard joins us. She's also a quilter, a teacher, and really cool. Can't wait for you to hear the interview. Can you say a quick hello so we can just test levels?
Hello, Elizabeth. My name is Lyric.
Awesome, Lyric. Where are you calling from?
I am calling from Cary, North Carolina, which is a suburb of Raleigh.
Oh, that's nice. That's very nice. How's the weather? Were you guys having snow or something?
Yes, we were. We were. We still have snow on the ground in the heavily wooded areas by our house.
Do you normally get snow? Is snow like a normal thing for you guys?
No. Not at all. Everything shuts down because it's very hilly terrain and we have no road clearing equipment and no snow tires, and Southerners do not know how to drive, so it's safer to stay home.
Yeah, I think it was like maybe last year when we thought we were going to get snow, and so the whole city shut down for 3 days just in case.
Yeah, we're kind of like that too. But we do get snow and ice, and the black ice. A big issue, especially on the hills.
Oh, that's good. That's stressful. That's not fun. That's not fun at all. All right. Well, let's start with our first question, which is, do you tell me your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
My mom sewed, and she was excellent. She tailored for other people. But I also saw her have nightmare clients, which told me I never wanted to sew for other people. And my grandma quilted. She lived with us, but she didn't do patchwork, really. She just liked to set up a frame and stitch fabric together.
Really? Kind of like whole cloth? Like a whole cloth?
Oh, yeah. Cheater
cool.
quilts, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what era was she doing the cheater quilts on the quilt frames?
She lived with us all through the 80s and 90s.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Hand quilting cheater cloth quilts. Interesting. Do you still have any of those quilts, or are they long gone?
My grandma was fabulous. She really had no sense of design and color. When patchwork, it was a mix of polyester and cotton and plaids and flowers and weird colors. But we all fight over her quilts.
I love it. That's really good.
We don't, friendly fighting. We all adore them, no matter how badly they look.
I love it.
It's a part of her. We don't really care what they look like.
Yeah, interesting. I love that. That's really great. Hold on, let me turn off the mail so it doesn't make noises. Awesome. Okay, so tell me, how did you get involved? So you are I would say you would describe yourself as an artist using textiles, but you're an artist as opposed to a quilter. Would that be right? Or do you see yourself as a quilter and an artist, or quilting is art, or sort of help us understand a definition of what this whole thing is?
Yes, to all of the above.
Yeah, exactly.
I have always been creative of one sort or another, but I used to be a musician. And then I tried a lot of different art forms until after I decided to stay home and have my babies, and discovered quilting. And because I had sewn since a very early age, it was a natural fit, and it was fabulous. And the only thing I ever did that stayed completed longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I started out as a traditional quilter. I can do patchwork and perfect points and hand applique with the best of them. But as soon as I saw my first art quilts, I took a hard left turn into that field because it really fulfilled a creative need I have. And so today when I introduce myself, I just call myself an artist, and they ask, what do you do? And I say, I work with textiles, and I make quilts that are abstracts or portraiture, and they're meant to hang on the wall.
They're gorgeous. They're so gorgeous. Oh my gosh. I'm really psyched to talk with you. Do you, so when you start working, tell me your process of working. How is your process as an artist different than your process when you were starting? Like is the process of quilting, like a traditional quilt, and different or similar to your process of creating an art quilt?
It depends on the kind of quilt I'm making, and it depends. I think quilts are the world of quilting is such a big, beautiful, and diverse ocean that there's every type of traditional quilter and every type of artist that also makes quilts. So my process kind of depends on how I feel that day and what I'm making. If I am doing abstract art quilts, often I'll start with sketchbooks, and I love geometry. I love clean, abstract designs. And I'll make a whole bunch of thumbnails in my sketchbooks. I'll throw down a bunch of circles and lines and figure out how they all work together. And then that will spark the idea that I begin to cut my fabric from.
And you did a blog post recently about sketchbooks. And I thought it was interesting. Do you go back? I mean, you have them all in this great picture of each year you have a sketchbook. Do you, So I'm thinking about sort of like, is it like your diary, the sketchbook? Do you feel like it's like,
I call it my paper brain.
Yeah.
I'm very much ADD. I didn't know I was until my children were diagnosed and we're looking at it, and my husband's looking, I get this from you. That explains a lot. So not a lot sticks in my brain, and I'm not linear, and I forget things easily. So I write everything down. And I also write and doodle and sketch anytime I have to sit still and listen. I have to do that, or else my mind just wanders in a million different directions. So my sketchbooks aren't just for art. They have grocery lists. I let my kids draw in them. Or I write ideas for things that are coming up. They're just an everything dumping ground. So really they are my paper brain.
That's so interesting. And you didn't go to art school. You have a BA right in English literature.
I do.
How did you become the artist that you are? Because your sketches, I mean, even your sketches are just really cool and amazing.
Oh, thank you.
So how did this process happen? And did you take art classes, or sort of how did you get to where you are now?
It's pretty circuitous. My dad was a high school art teacher, which means that I refused to do visual art when I was growing up. Because he would look at something and say, this is how to fix it, instead of telling you it was pretty. So I was like, I couldn't take that. So I was a musician, and that's all I did until after I left home and moved across the country and started taking different art classes. When I was in college, I had an English major, mostly because that was the easiest scholarship to keep.
Interesting.
And I spent most of my actual time in the music department, but the school also had a program where concurrently with your degree, you take all the prerequisites to go into graduate architecture. I think the year I left, they added one course and called it an undergraduate degree. So I'm one course shy of a double major.
And that had the sketching and the.
That's where I started sketching.
Interesting.
That's where I had to first overcome the fear of the blank page and try to make it good. So I've always kind of kept sketchbooks since then for one reason or another, but I didn't get into the art quilting till well into early adulthood and motherhood. I think I was in my late 20s.
So interesting. All right. So I've interviewed a couple of, I'm really interested in art quilts and sort of their place in the quilting world. So let's ask that big, broad, silly question. So what do you think the role of the art quilt and the artist is within this space at the moment? And do you think it's new, or have there always been art quilts?
I think there always have been. If you look at the history of traditional quilting, it's women who had to keep their families warm or it's women who had leisure time and needle arts were the only acceptable form of creative expression. Mm-hmm. And so I think women have always used quilting and stitchery as a creative outlet. So I am a firm believer in that quilts have always been art. Now there is traditional patchwork where you find a pattern that you like and you either have the fabric chosen for you and follow what's on the pattern and buy a certain line of fabric, or you choose your own. So there are completely different levels of artistry that go into each one, but I am also a big fan of craftsmanship and think that there's artistry in that. So where do art quilts fit into that world? I think, I'm a big tent kind of girl. I like having everybody welcome in one big space. I love it that now quilts and textiles are getting more appreciation in the fine art world. That's a stickier question.
That's my second question, is sort of this relationship. It's funny both ways. Like how are your art quilts received in the art world? And then often I've heard like art quilts. I've heard from other art quilters that sometimes they like being in the art world because it's not as fussy about the things that a quilting judge is fussy about. That it's a different beast, whether you're in the art world versus the quilting world in terms of competitions and calls for entries and things like that.
Yeah, they're completely different, and it depends whether you actually care about what judges think or not. Yeah. When I enter a piece in the quilt world, I know what I'm getting into. It's the quilt world. So of course they care about craftsmanship and perfect corners and if the back is messy or not.
Right.
And that's fine. I just know that that's what
they care about. Right.
Yeah. That's what to expect. That's the tradition it comes from. That's where you go. So if I care about what judges think in that world, I make sure that my craftsmanship is up to par. In the art world, I have been very, very lucky that my local area is very, very welcoming of fiber arts in the fine art world, at least in the lower levels. In the high museums, not so much. But I think that's because by and large, most museum curators are still white men, who value work made, by men. Yeah. It's women's work, so it has less value, unless, of course, a man makes it. And I love it that men make quilts. I really do. I just think they are more easily appreciated by the fine art world.
Totally. But that's true. Like, I remember dance class, right? Like, as a kid, like if there was like one boy in the dance class, they'd be like put front and center, and it was like, okay, like he's not even good. Like really, like come on, like stop privileging.
Well, the dance world needs the guy. And
I know, but then they got like they got at least a couple of the boys thought they were so good at dancing, and it was like you're okay. You're an okay dancer. You just happen to have different parts.
There are men in the quilt world who are really, really good and deserve the acclaim they get. And there's several of them who are amazingly wonderful and open, and they realize and give credit to the shoulders they stand on.
Yeah.
And I appreciate those men in the quilt world. But there's a lot of women who have worked longer and do better work and don't get any attention.
Seems to be the way of our world, right? I mean, it just is. It's so frustrating, but this is not a new problem.
It's changing. I'm a realistic Pollyanna kind of person.
Okay.
I love seeing the good, and I know the reality, but I just choose to ignore the stuff that makes me feel bad a lot of times.
No, I think that's good. And you do see huge improvement. I mean, huge strides. I mean, really, that's true. We just have to keep going, just have to keep going. So, yes. Okay, so you were at Houston Quilt Festival. That's where we met. And tell me about your experiences. How do you go? You had quilts in the show as well, right? Am I right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I've had quilts there, usually in the special exhibits. My entries did not get accepted into the competition this year.
Interesting.
So, and that's just part of being an artist, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like being grown up as an artist means that you're not crushed every time you're rejected. You just move on to go to the next thing. So I've had quilts in special exhibits for years. I teach there on a regular basis. This is one of the first years teaching that I have had several days off.
Yeah.
Instead of teaching the whole time, so that I could really meet people and enjoy the show on the floor. And that's
really cool.
My favorite. I call it the biggest slumber party in the world.
It is kind of, isn't it?
Fun. Yeah. There's people there from literally all over the world, and they're amazing people. Quilters are the funnest, nicest, friendliest people.
Yeah.
So I play this game where, like, I look at my watch and walk down the aisles at Quilt Festival and see how long it takes before I see somebody I know, and then hang out with them for a while. It's usually like 3 minutes.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so funny. I went there, I went last year and didn't know anybody, and I got a lot done, and my kind of work done, right? Like, met people, talked with people, very, very efficient. This year, not so efficient, because now we know lots of people, and it's exactly what you said. It's just this gargantuan space of people. Either you're meeting new people, or you are talking with old friends, or both. And it was like wonderfully inefficient the entire time. So it was kind of remarkable in its.
Yeah, I love it. Just for that.
Yeah, it's really great. And so, what classes do you teach? Art? You're teaching art classes there. You didn't do a ton of teaching. What percentage of your life is teaching at this point?
For my business, I would say that over half of my income comes from teaching. I'm incredibly fortunate in that I don't have to pay my rent with this income. Yeah. I do pay a lot of stuff, but not the rent. So half of it comes from teaching. The other half comes from writing and merchandising. And I'm the mother of 5 children, 3 of which live at home still. So I take limited teaching engagements. So
interesting.
I'm sure I spend about 80% more time working on everything that goes around the teaching than I do actually making the quilts. But it's so rewarding for me that is fulfilling.
How do you prepare for that? You have a lot of different classes. What's your process of creating a course for quilting? Because I don't think people understand how much time must go into doing that.
For real. You spend a lifetime mastering a skill. You spend a lot of time learning how to communicate. Yeah. I spent a number of years taking classes just to watch how teachers taught, because I knew this is something I really wanted to do. I also come from a family of teachers and said I would never be a teacher, but here I am.
Right,
and
it happens.
It's teaching on my own terms to the best people of the world. It's awesome. But I develop classes by taking the things I love the most and organizing them into a way that other people can understand. A lot of times I have a quilt bee that I love to go to, and I'll teach them a class, and they have so many different personalities in the quilt world that if each one of them can understand.
That's really great. Yeah. You've got like a core group that you can kind of try them out. That's a great. Yeah.
It's really, really helpful to do that. And then I make lists, I make spreadsheets, I break my time down by 15 minutes at a time to say I need to get this done and this done and this done, and save this 15 minutes for introductions and explanations. And
that's really interesting.
And then my classes, often the surface design classes, have a ton of supplies. So I spend a lot of time organizing kits, and I usually bring all of the supplies for the students. That's because they're not things that they would usually have in their stash.
Yeah.
And I want them to not to have to buy all these things.
Yeah.
Just to, my whole teaching philosophy is I don't teach anything above kindergarten level. It has to be playtime and finger painting and recess and fun.
Right.
Because they have to be able to fearlessly explore an idea without I guess in patchwork and things like that, if you make a mistake, it affects everything later on, and it's stressful. And the things I teach, I encourage mistakes. I'm a big, messy, explore all the ideas and then turn around and learn from everything you did, analyze it and figure out if it's a good thing or a bad thing or neutral, or how can you change it to make it better. So it's my classes are all process. They're not product. I want to give my students tools, whether it's surface design tools or ways to think about design and art principles. I want to give them tools so that they can apply those tools to making whatever it is they love to do the most.
And do you find that because you are teaching techniques, that do they come out with a finished product? Is that an important part of the class, or are people just want to understand the technique? I try really hard to not have products. I do, like the surface design classes, I encourage them just to make a sample book of each technique. We use jump fabric, and we try out each technique as many times as you want on it and write notes right on the fabric, and then maybe staple it together to make a little fabric book, so that you can look back and say, oh, this technique would be perfect for the next quilt I want to make, instead of having them make something that I love it. That's really cool. Did I lose you?
No, I'm still
okay. Good. We've had a lot of internet problems. I think it's the Zoom software. I might not be, but we had a lot of problems 2 days ago. So anytime there's silence, I'm like, are you still there?
We're still good.
Okay, cool. Tell me a little about teaching at the online workshops. How is that different? And how is teaching art online? How do you feel? How hard is that? How different is that?
So I teach two different kinds of things. And one is how to think and see like an artist. And that's not really things to do with your hands. So writing and explaining and talking kind of works with that. Yeah. But the things that you do with your hands, like screen printing, for instance, they need video. Mm-hmm. So I've had professional videos produced. I hired a videographer to produce and film and edit DVDs for me, but because DVDs are kind of going the way of the wind, I've turned those into online workshops.
Very cool.
So people can see and watch, and they can pause and go try it and come back and repeat anything, as long as they want. So I think the online videos for techniques like that works really, really well. And I'm there to answer any questions that they like. And the same is true for the art classes. Mm-hmm. I don't have videos in those classes yet, but they're pretty extensive as far as writing and visual examples. And if you participate, if you post your work, if you ask questions online, I'm there the whole time to really have some good conversations. And we work a lot on analysis and objective critique skills and really understanding deeply the elements and principles that go into compositions. So online's pretty effective, and it's pretty nice because I usually do it at 5:30 in the morning in my pajamas.
That's really nice, right?
Yeah, they don't know. Yeah. And they're probably the same way. Except
right. It's so funny. So much of my time is now spent either doing interviews or I teach online and in the classroom. And so I'm getting to the point where it's well, why are we going to, it's important to see people, but it's you do get kind of used to it's fine to just be in your house with your kittens. And
I think there's place for both.
I do too.
Because I do find in a retreat experience where I have the same group of students for a week, we get so deep. And it's a really intense learning period when you're one-on-one with your students in person, because there's no gap. The conversation and the ideas flow seamlessly. Yeah. So I think there's definitely still place for both.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the human connection on one-on-one is super important. So I totally agree. Okay, I have a bunch of things to ask you about still. Thermofax. What is Thermofax?
A Thermofax is an old machine that used to be used as a carbon copy machine, but some genius has invented a carbon and heat sensitive emulsion coating for screen fabric. And you can send through a carbon, like something printed on your laser printer, with this fabric through that vintage Thermofax machine, and out comes a screen that you can use for screen printing.
That's so interesting. And your work
like
is
instant gratification screen printing. It's awesome.
Did you use that? You have really cool work of the Y is for yearning and the still yearning, the images. Is that part of that? How are you doing? You're using a whole bunch of techniques, right? You're using...
Yeah, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, so that's how are you using Thermofax before we go on to those work?
Thermofax I use for creating cloth. I love layered texture and layered imagery, where a piece will have a visual impact from far away. But one of the reasons I love textiles as a medium is because the closer you get, you can discover layer on layer of imagery and stitching and meaning. So I use screen printing to build up images one on top of the other. Often my screen printing isn't really bold. It's very subtle layers of texture, often almost monochromatic within the same color range, until you get to a focal point image that will have a lot of contrast. But so screen printing is kind of one kind of fabric and quilt I make. You were talking about Y is for yearning.
Yeah, before we go on to that, let me ask you a question about the 10 by 10, the flutter, because it's got the music instrument. Is that a cello? Is that a violin? What is that? Is that a...
I've done work, I think Flutter has violins. And then it's got the music behind it and the wings on the violin, right? So each step of that process is screen printed.
So you do different layers of screen printing on that one? So interesting. And I saw from your shop that you had like the Bach, the music, that you could get the screen, like, and it's got in the background little music notes. So I imagine that's what that is, right?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll take the cloth I've dyed and screen print with Cascade dishwashing gel, which has enough bleach in it to take some of the dye out. And then after I finish that process, I'll go back in with the same color of paint as the dye and overprint with that. And then, layer on layer until I get the image I want.
And then with these, so when I've interviewed quilters that identify as artists, which I actually think all quilters are artists in some way. I'm like a very kind of inclusive thing. But sometimes they're like, well, if I make a pattern of it, I want people to use it, to make it. But if I don't make a pattern, then I don't want them to be copying it. Do you feel that way? I mean, your stuff is gorgeous and amazing. And I imagine impossible for others to actually reproduce. But like if someone saw these and was like, oh, I want to make that too, how would you feel about that? Do you feel like that's your space and others shouldn't make their own version? Or do you feel like that doesn't matter?
Well, when I have designs that I feel like I'm creatively finished with, those will be for purchase. The screens that I use to make them, the imagery will be available on my shop for anybody. And then I really don't care. And I kind of feel like, they can try to make my imagery and that's fine, but nobody will really make it exactly like I do.
Right.
And I'm fine like that. So I specifically have on all of my screens that they're free to use it. There's no copyright restrictions. They're free to use it commercially or private really use, however they want.
That makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, so are you ever concerned about, first of all, the process is going to be like what, do you have any worries about? I like that. I like your approach, but I'm curious, like, if you have any worries about that, like, did you have any thinking about it, or do you just feel like, look, I've used it, I made it, let it go out in the world, kind of Creative Commons, like it should be out there? Do you want people to attribute the Thermofax screen to you? Do you want an attribution that it came from you?
No. So if I am concerned about it, I just don't put those images out for public use.
You're very clever.
There comes a time when I am done with it. And I had amazing mentors. Carol Breyer-Fallert was one of my early, generous, kind, amazing businesswoman mentors. And she said, yeah, people will try to copy your stuff if it's really good. That's kind of a compliment, but they'll never do it like you do. They'll never be able to do it like you do. And if they do, people will look at their work and think it's yours. So, I just decided early on to specifically not worry about that.
Not worry about that.
If I have a quilt that's copyable, like I'm for the very first time making some commercial patterns. They're in the very early stages of the process, and they are specifically for quilts that I really don't care if other people copy or not. Yeah. That's why I'm making a pattern of them.
That's why you're making the pattern.
So my regular artwork, I really don't worry if people try to copy it. I just choose not to worry about that at all.
I like that. Because you really can't control it. I mean, it's a lot of stress for not a lot of payoff, you know?
Exactly.
Do you register your works with the Copyright Office? Do you ever...
I have not.
You have not. Interesting. Okay, so your work, I'm just kind of overly overwhelmed by your amazing... I just keep going. Okay, this is not about surfing. This is about conversation. So let's go back to some of the new work, the Y is for Yearning and the Still Yearning, which have images, many images. They're amazing.
Those are digitally created. So immigration is one of my touchstone issues and has been for years. So some of the work I made recently, because immigration is such a hot topic, centers around those. And I come from immigrants both a long time ago. I am descended from Elizabeth White, who is one of the first English babies born on this continent, as well as my mother-in-law is an immigrant. So, I believe that is one of America's amazing and great strengths. So I am blessed to have some really cool imagery and family photos, as well as finding some beautiful online libraries that are always copyright free. I always check that. But photos of people who have come to this country and made it great. And so I take those images, I manipulate them in Photoshop, I layer and collage them. The Still Yearning is pictures of immigrants on the background of a waving American flag. And I found that image online too, and was able to contact the photographer and explain everything I wanted to do with it and ask him permission to use it. And he gave me permission, and I sent him pictures of the finished work. And the cool thing is it turns out he is an immigrant himself from Poland.
How cool.
So
he must have been very moved by that, because it's incredible.
It was serendipitously lovely. So that piece had images from the New York Library collection of immigrants who had come through both Angel and Ellis Islands in the early century. And the Y is for Yearning is part of the Migrants Alphabet project that Jane Davila just put together and is still touring. And it's based on an abolitionist slave book, anti-slavery book, that was a children's alphabet primer. So she's collected different artists to represent each letter of the alphabet. So my letter Y is razor wire border wall. And behind that are pictures of my own immigrant ancestors, one of whom came from Cuba to this country to fight for America in World War II. Amazing. Those many of my immigrants, if they had tried to come today, would not be welcome.
Yeah. It's a bit chilling, isn't it? It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you were part of Threads of Resistance. Your piece, the one that we were talking about, actually, at least at the, I think at the New England Quilt Museum, is the part of the poster, right? Like your stuff is really cool. Tell me about Threads of Resistance and how you felt about that, being part of that.
It's an interesting exhibit. Again, quilts as art and a form of expression. And in this case, it was reactions to the way mostly women felt about recent events. And, some were very controversial.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people who said, leave quilters alone, leave quilting alone. It should only be this peaceful, happy, ignore everything hobby.
Yeah.
Not realizing the history. Quilts have been protests since abolition, the AIDS quilt, prohibition. Women have always used whatever form of expression they had to express how they feel.
Yeah. Well, I thought what was so amazing about the Threads of Resistance, we also went to, we missed Threads of Resistance at New England Quilt Museum by a week. We were there the week before it was there. But we saw the book and also talked to Pam Weeks, who's curator there. But we went to Atlanta to the Museum of Design, Atlanta, and they had a craft activism, and it was a bit different than the Threads of Resistance. But I think it's so interesting because I feel like they're so powerful. Like there's something about the time taken with textile art that is, I'm sure for me personally is incredibly moving. And this is so much part of what is happening now. These incredible artists, including you, that are like doing these incredible things, which are showing sort of what the medium can do in this really amazing way. So while they have these messages, the social messages that I am totally on board with, the art itself is just incredible and stunning and moving and incredibly creative. And you're part of that in a huge way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think art at its core for anybody in any medium and any level they're at is just a form of communication. It's just, for some of us, visual things are easier to communicate what we think and feel than writing an essay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. Now, New York Public Library, do they know you made a quilt of their public domain images?
No.
I have to put you in touch. I'm friends with the guy who oversees copyright at the New York Public Library, and I bet he would just be so happy and amazed because he's very much about people using the materials there, and this is such a great example of why libraries matter.
Oh, totally. I was just this morning looking at. There's like a TripAdvisor for libraries.
Really?
It's an outsourced thing. So it tells you about different libraries that are amazing all around the world. So I've put that on my travel bucket list.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Libraries. That's very cool. All right. Speaking of, we still have to talk about the cards. See, we're so not we're past 30 minutes. It just happens. Tell me about call for entries. So you have a list of sort of upcoming calls for artist entries. Tell me why you did that and how people might understand how to use this list that you've created, which is very long and very impressive.
It's a list of calls for entry that specifically is geared towards art quilters, and most of the shows that are listed are either quilt shows or calls for entry that are for shows specifically featuring art quilts. There's a lot of fine art shows out there that will also accept quilts, but I wanted to focus on this. And I started it just because I kept it for myself. Mm-hmm. I used to enter tons of shows all the time. And it was my own resource. And then when I finally decided I needed a website, I was like, well, why would anybody, what do I have a value to offer to people? And that was it. And I think it is valuable to a lot of people around the, in the community. And I just believe in giving back. So there have been points over the last few years where the rest of life was overwhelming. And I've had, fabulous, wonderful, amazing volunteers help me update the list when I couldn't manage it myself. But it's just my thing to offer, to give back. It's kind of a pay it forward.
I love it. It's so great. And do you have advice to people who may have not entered things before, or sort of how to approach this list if they're thinking about, and why should they enter their quilts? Like, Tell me a little bit about
and that's
why.
a good thing to think about it. I think you should analyze first and think pretty hard about what you want to get out of it. Do you care the most about winning ribbons? Do you care the most about just having people see your work? Do you care the most about selling your work or winning awards? You know, those, you have to think about that first because it's expensive. I mean, you have to pay entry fees, you have to pay shipping back and forth. You know, and when I was entering a lot of work, I won just enough awards to kind of break even most of the time. You know, so it's expensive. So what are your goals? So first figure those out and then figure out which shows will meet those goals the quickest. And then grow up and cut the apron strings. Once you make a work and send it out there, it's not about you anymore.
Yeah.
Every viewer brings their own set of unique prescription lenses to view whatever it is they're seeing. So if they don't like your quilt, it's not about you. It's not about how good your quilt is. It's about, you know, Cousin Marge always wore bright orange and they hated Cousin Marge because she bullied them. And so anything orange, just, they really don't like. Yeah. It's not that it isn't a good orange quilt. It's about them and Cousin Marge, you know? So you look at it through those glasses and that prism. And also, if you were crushed by every rejection, you need to go volunteer for some jury process to sit during a judging process and help, you know, be a holder at a quilt show while the judges go through all the things and just see how the process really works, because it's a complete crapshoot. I mean, every jury process that I've been involved in rejected tons of really, really good quilts. It's just on how good the photograph is. It's just what the pool of photographs that were entered was, because you might have this one thing and everybody else just happened to enter something else that works together. Or it might be about the linear feet in the gallery space and they only have room for 30 quilts and 400 were entered. Yeah. You know, so there's so many different factors that have absolutely nothing to do with how good your work is or how worthy of an artist you are. You know, every artist experiences rejection on a regular basis if they're entering shows, and just, you know, find a different show to enter.
Totally. I totally believe. I mean, that is being a grown up. I mean, that's really, it's so funny because I've been in many different fields in my life where rejection was just part of it. And you just can't, that just can't be part of your, you can't get, if you worry about the rejection, you're just going to be like, you know, a puddle. It's just part of being tough and being part of the field.
I think one of the things is that we invest so much time and effort as quilters into the work we make that, you know, if you only make 2 major works a year and they don't get into the first 5 shows you enter, it kind of feels like you're wasting your time if that's your main goal. So maybe
let me ask you a couple of questions about that. How do you work differently on a quilt that you, how often do you, tell me a little bit about the quilt itself. So do you, how is making an art quilt for competition something different? How long does it take you? And then how when you get it done, do you enter it in a whole bunch of things, or do you wait for one and see if it gets accepted? Sort of, how does that work exactly, that whole space?
It's different for every artist, and for me it's different for every quilt. Sometimes, often I'm invited to make a piece for a show, so I make it, and sometimes it's made very quickly right before the deadline. Because life is like that in my world. Sometimes, like for instance, now I'm working for a solo show where I have to fill the entire gallery space.
Very cool.
And it's not till next July, but I've kind of decided not to do anything else except for those. I've got half the works that were already in my collection, and the other half I've had to calendar out very specifically and leave plenty of leeway in order to get them done. Some pieces, but most of the time when I don't have those specific things, I'll just make whatever is fascinating me at the moment, whatever piques my curiosity, whatever questions I have that I'm trying to answer artistically. And if I feel like entering it, I do. I used to churn out things although I've never been prolific because of that 5-kid thing.
Yeah, that does.
Prolific in the art world. And then once it's done, I'll look up and see if it fits in any shows and if I have time to enter. And, the quilt world's kind of a weird thing where they think art has an expiration date of 2 years. So you enter it as much as you can for those 2 years until it expires.
Weird.
I know it's weird, but I think because the quilt pond isn't giant, that if you enter a bunch of stuff, you enter shows that are all around the country, so they want newer work that everybody hasn't already seen. Although I still think it's ridiculous because who's going to travel to quilt shows all around the country?
Right, exactly. Okay, tell me about, because we're going to run out of time, the cards. Tell me about your cards because I had seen them at the show. Tell me about that process and what is that?
So I have a new product. It's a deck of cards with warm-up exercises to jumpstart your art. It's called Start Your Art. You can find it at lyrickinard.com. But they're all 15-minute, silly, fun, ridiculous, make bad art exercises just so that you can get the creative juices flowing. They're perfect for an artist in their studio or a mom with their kids or a teacher with their students. And the idea's been brewing around in my head for years and years. I have a book called art-quilt that was published by Interweave a number of years ago. And one of the chapters is design games. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought that it would translate really, really well into this, smaller play kind of format.
Yeah.
But at the time, the publisher, when I ran it by them, they're like, nah, you can't do that. That'll compete with the book. So I was kind of stymied with that for a long time until recently when I was able to purchase back the rights from my book after it sort of kind of went out. The hard copy went out of print and they weren't marketing the digital copy at all, so it wasn't selling. So I looked at that and said, this is a good time to approach the publisher that had been bought out several times since and say, so they're not invested in me in any way. And I approached them and asked them if I could purchase the rights back. And after that, I was able to I feel like I own my own brain again.
That's really cool.
I can do what I want with it. So I did.
That's really cool. That's amazing. That's really cool. And does it change? Does it change how you think about contracts with publishers after that experience?
Yes, for sure. I think publishers, the whole publishing industry has been going through such upheaval for such a long time. And they've changed so much. Of course, when I published this book, it was like a life dream and a life goal that was realized way earlier than I had thought it would happen. And it was wonderful. And they marketed my book like crazy. They asked me to do all kinds of marketing for it as well, which I was happy to do for about a year. And then I was done. And they put up the money. They did all the editing and the layout and the photography, and they had it printed, and it's fabulous. And they really got that started. Yeah. But at this point, publishers do almost no marketing for their people. It feels like in the craft industry, at least, they only have people who are able to do all their own marketing, write books. And I feel like if they're going to get 90% of the profits, then they should not ask the artist to do 80% of the work. So from now on, I have several little booklets that I'm publishing, and I intend to republish my book after I revise it on my own. Yeah. So I won't go through a publisher again unless things
I hear
change.
that a lot. It's kind of remarkable. It's just self-publishing has grown up in such an easy way, and if you already have a name, that the publishers just aren't doing the kind of things they used to do. So this interesting moment of the legitimacy of self-publishing, at least in the quilting industry and the quilting world.
And that's the key. It's whether you already have a name or not. With my first book, I had no name to start with, and that it kind of gave me a name. So now that I've built up my own following and can target my own people. I mean, this is what happened with my DVD as well. My first instructional DVD was published with the same publisher, and they were great with it. And I made like 15% royalty on what the publisher sold it as. So if they wholesale it, I only get 15% of wholesale. Right. And the next DVDs where I hired my own editor, even though the sales numbers were drastically lower than being with a giant distributor, I made bucket loads more money.
Amazing,
just selling it myself because I owned it and I produced it and I made all the profit myself.
Now with Start Your Art, are you using a distributor like Checker or some major distributor? Like, can you have that relationship on your own as an artist to get your stuff out, or sort of what's your business strategy on the cards?
So they're brand new and it's the holidays and I have not had time to do all that stuff. But my long-term strategy is I would love to get it to distributors. So yes, that's part of the plan. I am not convinced that it's the perfect market in the quilting world. I think it's great for quilters, but
it's also great for art teachers, and it's a bigger market than the quilting world.
Right. So my first priorities are to see if I can get into the fine art world.
Nice.
And alongside that, I will also see if I can get it into the art world. But I'm going directly to museum gift shops. I'm trying my hardest to get a foot in the door to places like Blick Art Supplies and Jerry's Artorama. But it's
hugely, and also somehow you even look at like Scholastic or like some sort of like the educational distributors. That's because it seems like this is like perfect for like an art teacher all over the place that has to do stuff with their kids,
And you know what? Let me tell your audience something. If you send me an email extolling the virtues of your favorite public school art teacher, if you're lucky enough to still have one, I will send a deck of cards to them.
That is huge. That is so huge.
I am such a fan. I mean, my kids go to magnet schools where they ride a bus an hour to get there.
Wow.
Mostly because they have arts programs. And I am so invested in arts and music programs in public schools.
It's so true. My kid went to one of those. It's so funny because it was an art-based school, but it's also one of the best schools in New Orleans. So you got a lot of kids that weren't art kids, but that were at that school. And they're just better kids because they were, even if they don't grow up to be artists, that they were immersed in an art-based program from kindergarten is so important, I mean,
I think it teaches you to think broadly and creatively. Yeah. And I think going forward in the future, that's going to be, and we've spent so long teaching to tests that really don't measure creativity.
Yeah.
The creative thinking and the critical thinking and the analytical thinking that's not just regurgitating memorized things, it's going to be a critical skill, and the arts can engender that.
It's so funny because you say that. I have this other project that is very it's coding law from around the world. It's like very heavy, it's very hard, it hurts your brain to do it. And I'll do that project, and then I'll take a break, and I'll go quilt or do some sort of craft work. And my brain, it feels like I'm literally using a different part of my brain. Like
it resets everything, and it broadens.
It's very interesting. Isn't
synapses firing all over your head. Right?
Yeah. So the concept of art, like it feels like the whole person is being used if you include art in your day.
Yes. Yeah, so hey, people, send me an email and convince me to send a card deck to your favorite public school art teacher.
That is so very cool. Now, are you part of our quilting army? Are you on Facebook?
I am. I do believe I've joined up all your stuff.
Cool. Well, let them know about that too. And also feel free to put a link to the cards. I know that there's a lot of Facebook groups that are like, we don't sell. We're totally about selling stuff. So, because our project is really about understanding the quilting industry. So you are welcome to post anything you want there, and also explain this stuff. So feel free to participate and chat about things there, because that's what it's about. It really is a space to understand everything that's going on all levels. So I think that would be great too.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. This has been the fastest hour. It's like the perfect way to. We just should spend. So I also really think it's cool that you can have groups that can come to your studio and pay to be in your studio in studio time. That I think is the coolest ever.
Okay.
Yeah. So at some point when we are in your area, I don't fly, so I can't fly. So getting around is a little more challenging. There's a lot of trains in my life. So when you're back in your neck of the woods, we're going to have a group and come do a quilting army session at your studio, because that would be just so cool.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah, that would be really cool. We might have to put it on the list for, the list, because I feel like that's, you have your library bucket list. I have my places to go hang out, quilting people to go see.
Yeah. Oh, my bucket list is very, very, very long.
That's good.
I have to live 200 years.
That's really good. I love that. Well, this is awesome. So what are you going to do for the rest of the day? Are you going to do you do artwork every day, or certain days, or
I am in my studio every day. It's in my home. I have a new studio. I've taken over the entire third floor, and I call it the Palace.
That's great.
So I will be up here packing kits for upcoming classes. And right now, my entire Thermofax library is spread out over my entire floor, because I updated it and need to reorganize the binder. So I got to get the floor clean today.
It's the glamorous part of life.
Yep, and I'm looking at a pair of boots that I wore for 10 years that are super soft leather, and like they've cracked through. There's holes in the bottom, but the leather's soft, so I'm going to cut them up and
of course, because everything you see is part of your artwork. You can't help it. Right? I love it. Well, do you want to review this before we post it, or are you okay with me posting it?
I think we're good. It's been a delightful conversation.
It really has. Will you come back and keep us posted on how things are going?
I would love to.
Awesome. I love it. This is great. I'm so glad. It was so chaotic. I saw you a couple times in passing, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is the most chaotic space I've ever been in with you.
Welcome to the International Quilt Festival.
It's really true. Oh my God, it took me 2 weeks to just actually be able to talk to people again. It was so weird. I was way overloaded. Well, anyway, this is the delight, and I'm so glad you came and chatted with me this morning. It's so awesome.
It's been my pleasure, Elizabeth. Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.